Well, I'm sitting here with a very good friend and colleague, Mark Fulton. We're actually in the Marriott Marquis Hotel, in amongst the PRI in person event. And PRI is one of the biggest collections, I think, of sustainable finance, ESG finance.
I think it probably is the biggest,
Yes, and this is the biggest probably gathering here alongside the
1,300 people.
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite interesting. You've got all these sustainable investors meeting alongside the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco. So, and Mark, you've launched, I think, quite a prescient piece of work here, the IPR.
The inevitable policy response. But just to wind back a bit, Anthony, of course, you talk about our relationship. I've been an advisor to Carbon Tracker for many years, known you for many years. I'm a huge fan, and I love the work that Carbon Tracker does on all that micro-analysis, which I help form.
Absolutely.
So, let's
not just help,
so be up front here. So I love what you're doing. So how does that all fit together with this idea that we've been talking about with the PRI now for the last few months?
And PRI stands for Principles
Responsible. So it's the United Nations Principles of Responsible Investment, which is really what you might call a sustainability ESG focus. But within that, climate is very important, and they're placing more emphasis, I think, on climate. And this is one of the climate projects that they have got behind, which I think is very exciting. And essentially, it's been my sort of view for many years that people will, what you call the mainstream, the
investment bankers,
the investment bankers, asset managers, got a day job to do.
People who manage people's pensions.
They're not necessarily the ESG people. They're not the responsible investor types. They've just got to do their job, and they look at the climate thing and they're told, well, actually, we're not on course. According to the International Energy Authority, the great, source of it all, the so-called new policies scenario, which is their central scenario, says we're headed to 2.6 to 3 degrees.
The scenario is like a crystal ball. It's a sort of prediction of the future.
Prediction of the future, but they have model on NPS, new policies scenario. That's a bit more fundamental, that they can take current trends, they can take current policies, and they can say, what do we look like? And as a result of that, they can get that wrong, but that's still a bit more of a solid type of so-called scenario, and they call it their central case. And that says we're headed to at least 2.6, 2.7 degrees, not 2, and certainly not well below 2, which is what everyone's talking about these days. Forget 2 degrees, it's meant to be the Paris Agreement of well below 2 degrees. So, we're not on track for that, right? So a lot of mainstream investors go, great, so what? So you got all these scenarios, what do I care, It doesn't look like the central scenario's on track.
There's business as usual, which is like what we're online for now if we don't do anything, isn't there? And then there's add on the new policy scenarios.
Actually, by the way, you're right. I mean, new policy scenarios isn't even in the bag. No, I mean, we assume it's in the bag, but that's not in the bag. You're right. So the so-called current policies is even worse. Much worse.
And people often talk about 2 degrees, 3 degrees. I mean, that's not like in your backyard it's going to be 2 degrees warmer. I mean, it's the extra
global
energy in the system. It could be 20 degrees at the Arctic. And at the
well, most importantly, and if we're talking about that, I think the problem I said this years ago when I was at Deutsche, and we were talking to people about Deutsche Asset Management. We were talking about this stuff, and actually the average increase is not really the key. What the key is the increase in volatility and the standard deviation of temperatures, which leads to these climate events. So 2 degrees warming causes the extremes to increase, as you've just indicated, and it's at the extremes you get these climate events, you get the hurricanes, you get the fires, you get it's because you get crop failure, because there are really significant impacts on the highs and the lows of the standard deviation around the mean. And so, when people say, it's going to be 2 degrees or 3 degrees, that doesn't sound a lot. When you look at what that means at the extremes, that's quite a lot.
That means much more powerful hurricanes, I assume, with a lot more rain, a lot more.
Well, for me in particular, it means the the droughts and the floods and the rain and
migration,
the migration. It's those extremes that you got to get nervous about. Yeah.
So you talked about you spent many years in investment banking as an analyst. Ran big research groups at major global. Many people joining us in this conversation might be slightly. That might be counterintuitive. They might be struggling with this. Investment bankers thinking about climate and sustainability. I mean.
Well, I know we deviated a bit, and that's how these conversations go. So I want to come back to this notion of which I started on about why policy is so important, at least in people's minds. But so let me just finish that, and I'll come back to who I am a bit. But what I wanted to say is, so what you find is a lot of people say, well, I don't want to take you, this nice idea, it's all a scenario, who knows, we're not on course anyway, go away, right? So I've got to tell you, we all know 90% of people in the financial markets, honestly, that's where
my job is to get the best return for my investors.
Look, mate, nice, but go away, right? Yep. So what we're trying to do in this so-called inevitable policy response, and by the way, there's only two things we all joke that's inevitable: death and taxes. So inevitable is to catch people's mind and attention, is to say that we really want to change from the notion of scenarios to going back to what I then did. Why, as an investment banking analyst, as a head of research, I didn't present scenarios to investors. I presented a view. I said, in my best view, this is what's going to happen. Think about it. Maybe you want to act on it. Maybe you don't. But I wanted to say this is a compelling argument as to why you might want to take action about something. So the inevitable policy response says that if we balance the forces that can bring us towards 2 degrees, we've got technology trends. And Carbon Track has just done a great piece of work on how technology is really making a huge difference and is going to enable a lot of things to happen, right?
So Vision 2020, why you should see the peak fossil fuels
So that's
coming.
The first thing. Then the second thing is investors can make quite a big difference because they can work to engage with people to align themselves to a 2-degree outcome, so they can actually help make that happen.
You mean the company? I mean, ultimately the company
engage with companies to get on and align, right? And then what I call the ultimate backstop again is policy, right? It's like the policy will then finally pull a lever and go, no, we're doing it, right? We're really doing it. And the Paris Agreement is the mechanism, we think, has been set up for that mechanism with ratchets happening every 5 years, to get there, right?
Yeah.
Now, what I genuinely myself believe, and I haven't got a PRI hat on here, this is more me, is that that by 2025, those pledges, the pressure on the system, and that comes from the need for certainty. Companies need to know, are you serious about this? Because you can really destabilize the world economy by having a sword hanging over it and doing nothing about it. So we need more certainty. The technology means it's cheaper, right? So it's easier to act. Crucial idea that you guys are on, right? And society is increasingly looking at different events, hurricanes and so on, and no one can say, oh, that was that, but they're looking at going, something's going on here, right?
There's a big step forward in scientific attribution now on specific severe
but I'm not going
events.
to ever point at one event, but I think I'm going to say, look, I mean, people are getting uneasy and that affects voters and that affects politicians. So there are a whole number of other arguments we use as to why it might happen.
Yeah.
But I feel pretty confident that the pressure on the policymakers, and it's not just at the total level, it's like it's like the cities, the states, everyone that wants to do anything anyway, that's all filtering up and can be pulled together, I believe, in some very aggressive policy pledges by 2025. Now, hopefully, it's not 2025, it's 2020. But my own feeling is that, it might take a while to build, but I'm saying, look, by 2025, you've got to assume they've pulled some really big levers. Now, one of those would be, again, which is often discussed generally, carbon prices, taxes, markets, which, of course, Mark Lewis, the head of research at Carbon Tracker, is an expert in, has been writing a lot about. So my view is that the system will move to much more significant carbon pricing, performance standards, policy responses at all levels of the system, and that will cause a disruptive event. And it will take a few years to play out. But it won't be, I don't think it's cataclysmic, that's most important.
But the disruptive event being
the
governments acting.
Yeah. Now the level of disruption depends on, and you know, I can say to Anthony, he was one of the first people who talked about, is it smooth or is it disruptive? You talked about with me that years ago as one of your...
I read a blog about that.
That's one of your big theses, so I'm playing with that. We're also playing around with that. So I'm sort of saying, well, the more we say inevitable policy response, but act now.
Yeah.
Because it will happen, but the degree it happens depends on what we do in the next few years. If we do more, we have less to do.
Yeah.
The quicker we do it, the better, and we know the disruption is far more expensive the longer we wait.
Yeah. Well,
right?
the governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney's picked up on this as well.
So it's the climate
tragedy.
And by the way, the inevitable policy response is also known by some as the Minsky moment, and in fact, Governor Carney likes to call it a so-called moment where a system changes and there's an impact. Right?
A bit like the Brexit deadline. Yes.
So, I mean, I think that this, our view is that, my view is that we can get this big policy levers pulled and really complete that pull in 2025. And that people need to act now around that, and that technology is a massive enabler of that, And there was a very interesting vote done at the PRI plenary 2 days ago. So Al Gore did the plenary opening, and it was pretty much, to be honest with you, setting the scene for the inevitable policy response. Things are happening, technology's good, but we still need policy, right? To some extent. I think that's how I interpret it. And then PRI ran a panel, and their chairman said, okay, I'm going to offer you a vote, everyone in the room. A lot of people, I think it must be 1,000 people in the room, I don't know. You can have, what's your outlook? What do you believe? And I'll give you 4 options. 1, we're actually okay, everything's going to work out now, we're going to go to 2 degrees, everything's in place. Then the second option is technology on its own. They call it the Elon Musk solution. It's going to get us there in time. The third one was there'd be policy disruption, which is what we're sort of talking about. And the fourth one was, we're done. It's all over, it's heading into chaos, and we'll never get this done. And what was very helpful to us was that 63% of the vote went for policy disruption, 15% said technology on its own, but I don't think that was sort of fair. They go together. So if you actually combine those, we're up at 75%. Yeah. That's my point.
Well, that's the thesis you and I
that's
talking
right.
about.
And I'm glad to say only 1% went for we're okay now, and we're still trying to find those people.
What are they even doing?
Yeah, right. No, I'm joking. And, but 15% thought the world might end, if you like, that we're not going to get on top of this. And that's not an unfair position to have. I just hope they're wrong, and I believe they're wrong. But so once you go there, then you should just be planning for chaotic impact. So
how does this play? I mean, how does this play together in the sense that, our report talks about this technology-driven carbon transition, and you could go, oh, great, we can relax, and policymakers go, no problem. But isn't the danger that it's simply not happening fast enough?
Correct. You've just put, so in financial markets and anything you ever do, unfortunately, timing is everything, and so if we had another, 25 years, I don't know what it is, to the tipping point, where we've really got
the climate
where we can hardly pull it back, I'd be going, let technology do it, But if what we're saying is, and I tell you, some people think, I've heard that the tipping points are earlier than 2025.
Well, some scientists, I think, worry we've already reached it.
Sort of thing. But anyway, so part of what I feel drives the policy response by the mid-20s is that climate urgency from the scientists being reinforced. And there was a very good article, we quote in one of our papers, Hot House Earth, which was about these...
It was in the news a couple of weeks
ago. Big tipping points, right? So we're hopeful. I mean, I'm hoping that, because I'd love to get there in 2020, but certainly by 2025, you really need to be getting there, right, to get pulling some levers.
So how does this play out?
So the timing is this, is that the two big forces, the three big forces, I think, or four. There are four big forces, which we outlined in our why document. By the way, all our documents are on the PRI website. You can go and find them on the UNPRI website. You can find, if you look for inevitable policy response, there's about 5 papers. Okay. One of them is called Why It Would Happen, and I was responsible for that paper. So again, going back to these 4 big drivers, they were, technology is enabling lower costs, and it's giving policymakers more opportunity to push the system, right, without it becoming so, people say, oh, it's too hard. No, the system can get there. Pardon me. Businesses need certainty. They just don't need to be sitting around wondering when that is going to happen. And it is amazing. We quote the number of companies calling for a carbon price, including the big oil and gas companies, including Exxon. If you're serious, give us a carbon price. Give us a signal that you are serious, right? So then I think you've got the play out of these climate events, which cause what I call societal unease.
Yeah.
So those, I think, are the 3 big ones, and they sort of fit together.
So this, the thing we talked about you, and I talk about this economic tipping point followed by a political tipping point, and we've seen this with previous transitions. And I guess it's all about the politicians seeing the economic tipping point and realising their political bread, for one of the better descriptions,
and
Anthony,
I think you and I have discussed, that is an area I think is extremely fruitful for all research follow-up around that notion of how policy and technology and the interaction to create their own tipping point is going to be a very fruitful area to follow up on.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sort of, hi everyone, I've been talking too much.
So, one of the, my things in this is that, people like you, Christiana, that I've talked to, James Cameron, Anne Simpson, to me...
Why are we doing this?
Well, no, you're climate rock stars.
Well...
And in our world you are. We know, you're known to many because we're trying to, you've committed your life and your career now to dealing with this existential threat.
That's right.
Yet, you're outside of that bubble, you're less well known than this guy Dan TDM, that my kids follow.
Yeah, of course.
Tens of millions of followers.
Yeah, but I'm not that interesting on one level. They probably are, but because we're all techies.
But this is my question. Why? Why, when you're dealing with something so important to everybody on the planet, are you not? Is Christiana not more well known?
Well, I think I put it another way. Some people have a certain, charisma, and that's who they are. Leonardo DiCaprio just tweeted out your paper.
He did? I missed that. Well,
that's a rock star.
Okay.
A real rock star.
That tweet.
Yeah, that tweet is out there apparently. He's tweeted it to his followers.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
You should follow your carbon tracker. No, I was reading it. So I think we actually do need literally the rock stars.
Yeah.
Well-known people, and they are out
actors
there. And there are some really great people that have stood out for the environment, and that's great. What I find interesting, I look at it slightly differently, is that unfortunately it is complicated technically and economically. So I look at it like this: we need guys like all of us to say, okay, that's great, but we want, I put it like this: you don't want everyone genuinely wanting to solve something in the wrong way. Right, that would be a bit of a disaster, wouldn't it? Someone with real charisma and impact somehow gets the wrong way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
And there are some ways that, that people put up, I'm not sure would work so well. So I think it's our job to just be the people behind the scenes who are trying our best to put forward rational economic and political stories that will get traction, but we're never going to be the people that can sell them to. But having said that, the people that are here who have their finger on how many $1 trillion in the PRA, is it 80 or something crazy?
Something like that. Yep.
Some big numbers. they will listen to people like us.
Well, because often those big numbers
they actually don't want to listen to the actual rock stars. They want to listen to the boring old economists who actually are fun to listen to. There is a bit of elements of you got to be able to entertain, but nevertheless have that.
You heard it first here. So Mark, I want to get to.
I was describing myself as an investment banker seeking redemption.
This is what I was going to ask. Mark the person. And you've had an incredibly successful career in the investment banking world.
In research, yeah.
But, it's not easy to survive in that world. So what drove you to this space?
Well, I was always interested in the environment. My wife, is very interested in the environment, and she's actually working on the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So we've always had a bit of a family thing. But having said that, my very first paper was a bit early, 1991.
Wow.
In Australia. We called it The Greening of the Stock Market, and part 1, energy. So we're in Australia, and coal, we're in the heart of the commodity markets. So we decided to look into global warming. And at that time, the only people modelling global warming were the EPA in America, the Environmental Protection Agency, were doing the first modelling. And of course, technology was way behind what it is now. And we in Australia knew the Chinese economy was about to emerge from underneath the ocean and would be massive, and it would buy our coal, the Australian coal. I mean, you just knew it would power itself from coal. So we put forward a thesis, let's do this the right way, and so on. But I have to say, we sort of, by the end of doing the research, we sort of felt a bit on the back foot, because we sort of saw what was most likely again, you see, and that was that the Chinese coal fleet, and it's interesting, the Chinese coal fleet began to be built, and between 1992 and today it went from virtually nothing to 1,000 gigawatts of power in coal-fired stations.
And yet now
and it is the single largest emission source by sector, by region. Yeah. And that's why we worked on that at Carbon Tracker.
But it is a classic example, isn't it, though?
That was the first paper, went a bit quiet, got back to it. I was very lucky to go to Deutsche Asset Management, mid-2000s, and the head of Deutsche Asset Management, Kevin Parker, was a total believer in environmental investing, and he empowered us to start what was then Deutsche Bank Climate Change Advisors, which became, quite well known within the global investment community, and worked with Nick Robbins at HSBC. He had a big practice at HSBC, and we really, pushed it into global markets. And that was, that I loved that job, and then I left and become a consultant to NGOs and people that want to change the world. Yeah.
I mean, just to finish, on that, it's interesting because all the science, all the knowledge was there in the early 90s. I mean, there was this recent New York Times magazine.
But the technology wasn't.
True.
And I do think that, I remember my analyst who did it kept talking about best available technology, which is the EPA. They've had that for 30 years, right? But I kept saying, well, what is best available technology? And I think even back then they were talking about carbon capture in some way. They didn't really know.
Well, it was also in the UK, it was BATNIC, best available technology, not entailing excessive cost. And you can always get a great technology.
Thing. Yeah, but what was the cost? And BAT in the EPA was meant to be cost tested too. So we sort of realised that, it was a bit early, that idea. But get back to the mid-2000s, Al Gore kicked it off again in a way. A lot of people have been working on it. And I think we've been riding a wave, and I go back to it. I think this wave wouldn't have been possible without the technology. I do believe that.
Yeah, I've heard that from a number of sources.
So but the technology was also created by policy in the early days. Without the German
taxpayers
and all that, we would not be on the cost curve we're now on, and the Chinese gear up in relation to that. So again, this intimate relationship between policy and technologies is at the core still of this story, but with society getting more and more nervous about if that doesn't happen, what are we left with? And that combination of all that, I think, gets us to get the levers pulled, hopefully in time. I believe that. That's why I'm prepared to say, I said to the gathering of investors yesterday when I presented this, I don't know, 400 people in the room, whatever it was, okay guys, this isn't a scenario, this is an idea, this is a view from a sell-side analyst, and that was appreciated. May not be right, but they got the point that we want you to take this really seriously.
So Mark, thank you. I think that's a great place to end. If there was, very quickly, one thing to people watching this that they could do, what would that be?
Vote for people who care.
Vote for people who care.
About the environment and about the climate, because at the end of the day, it is a political economy.
Well, you heard it here first. Mark, thank you. It's been a great conversation.
Nice to chat.
Subscribe to the channel.
Yep.
There'll be more Climate Rock Stars. So I hope you follow and get involved with our new community. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks
It's been
again.
a pleasure.